Thank you for joining us today on Earthfile. Welcome to the program. I'm Ayola Kasim. Floods are among the most devastating natural disasters in the world, claiming more lives and causing more property damage than any other natural phenomena. In Nigeria, though not leading in terms of claiming lives, flood affects and displaces more people than any other disaster. It also causes more damage to properties. At least 20% of the population is at risk from one form of flooding or another. Although the Nigerian Meteorological Agency and the Nigerian Hydrological Agency had alerted Nigerians earlier in the year that there will be an above-normal rainfall in strategic parts of the country, which might lead to flooding incidents. Many people still fell victim. Today, we'll look at the causes and the way out. Just stay with us. Since June 2022, heavy rainfall and strong winds have been severely affecting different areas in the country. As at 6th of October, flooding had affected 33 of the 36 states. The most impacted states are Anambra, Bayelsa, Cross River, Delta, and Rivers in the south, and Kogi in the center. The crisis has displaced more than 1.4 million people and affected over 2.5 million. Bayelsa State has reported to be the worst affected, with around 700,000 people displaced or affected.
And I see the river, dry ground don't turn to River Niger. We dey inside, nowhere to go. Our children with us, they inside, they suffer. Small children, then they inside this river, this dirty, big snake, python, they pursue us. We they run up and down.
The floods have triggered a cholera outbreak in Borno, Adamawa, and Yobe. Already, more than 7,700 cases, including 324 deaths, were reported across these three states. 5,400 of these cases were in Borno State alone. Conflict and insecurity also affected the state. Flooding, a lack of access to hygiene services, and the contamination of water are likely to further increase the spread of cholera and other waterborne diseases. Heavy rainfall is expected to continue over the southern states. The accumulation of rainwater is likely to cause further flooding along the Niger and Benue rivers, and the number of displaced people may continue to rise.
We are working in conjunction with SEMA, the State Environmental Management Authority, to make sure that the effect on our people is not as high as what was obtainable in the year 2012. We sent alerts to people, we made radio announcements, and we told them that this is what we've been informed, and that if you are still living in riverine area, move on to higher grounds in Benue State on your own. The challenge we had was that many persons did not want to move. They look at these periods as a harvest period for them, especially the fishermen living in the coastal areas, in the riverine areas. They say anytime there is flood, their harvest is much. And we told them, choose between your life and the harvest of fish. Many of them were adamant. We made radio announcements, we sent leaflets, we did so many things to let them know that this year's flood will be more than what we saw last year, based on the projection that we had. It was when the flood became much and Let Go Down in Cameroon was released, the people saw it, and many of them began to move. At that point, we, in conjunction with SEMA, were working together to evacuate the people and then to see which other way we can do. And the state government promptly released funds to SEMA, and they bought materials, mattresses, and so many other things, food items, buckets, and so on and so forth, to release to the people. What we would do is to see, when this thing is released, what are we going to do? Is to let the people know that this thing will be released so and so time. And then it will give us that alert for us to get prepared. We cannot stop it. The only thing we can do, as far as the state is concerned, is purely mitigation. We cannot stop it. Now, the other thing that we've been appealing to the federal government to help us do all these years is to dredge the River Benue. When River Benue is dredged, it becomes deeper. The volume of water that it will be able to accommodate will be more. So the tendency to overflow will be less. But we've made such appeals several times. Several times. As I'm talking to you, it has not been done. And the level is getting shallower by the day.
Rivers State is one of the main oil and gas producing states in Nigeria. Parts of this state have been significantly inundated. Gas production in affected areas has been shut down. Supply disruptions are already being felt in homes across the country. Power supply disruptions can also be anticipated, isolating affected communities. Around 90% of foreign exchange in Lagos depends on fossil fuel exports, meaning the situation will also likely worsen the current economic crisis in the country. Flooding has affected roads, bridges, and some communication lines, leaving certain communities entirely inaccessible and cut off from services. As of the 30th of September, Ran and Damasak local government areas in Borno State, which were hosting displaced people, were only accessible via helicopter.
This is exactly 8 years, 28 years after the 1994 flood disaster. So we are already in a crisis, needing humanitarian crisis. And also, if this issue will be neglected or handled carelessly, we are still going into another new phase of humanitarian crisis.
The government is completely set, to address the issue of lack of drainages and also the maintenance of the drainages that have been constructed but that have been blocked due to garbages that fill these drainages.
As at 4th of October in Lokoja, Kogi State, roughly 113.3 kilometers of roads were submerged in flood water. As at 9th of October, the flood had destroyed a major road connecting 8 communities to the rest of Anambra State, forcing people to rely on boats for access. But there are also warnings that the catastrophic flooding across the country risks escalating a hunger crisis. More than 1 million acres of farmland have been destroyed by the worst flooding to hit the country in a decade. Fields that should be under harvest to feed the country instead lie deep under stagnant standing water, and farmers can only cross their land by boat. When the waters recede, they reveal precious crops destroyed and washed away. In Nasarawa State, over $15 million worth of rice crops have been washed away as floods submerged 4,500 hectares of Olam rice farmland in Rukubi Doma local government area of the state. Rice farming has been one of the efforts the federal government has encouraged over the years.
We've been able to rescue all our machinery from that place, and we have moved all the people away so that no loss of life to human beings take place. But unfortunately, the crop is worth around $13 or $14 million roughly in today's this one. And unfortunately, as you mentioned about the sugar cane in 2011, we also had the flood in 2012 here, the historic flood. So this is much worse than that. So this farm was affected in 2012 also. But we had made all the other arrangements like raising up the dikes and all. So, but this time the force of nature, it broke all the dikes and it came inside.
It's a trickle of what we produced in the last wet season.
Massive rice pyramids unveiled in January as payback of loans rice farmers borrowed to expand their production. The federal government claimed that rice production has increased to over 7.5 million metric tons yearly, from less than 4 million metric tons recorded in 2015, prior to the introduction of Anchor Borrowers Program. The low-interest loans had helped the farmers to more than double their average yield of rice, fighting armed herders on their way to success. And so during this year's planting season, they were more than happy to plant, None of them expected a deadly flood. Since August, more than 270 kilometers of cropland along the Benue and Niger rivers have been flooded. Every farmland within about 3 kilometers on each side of the riverbanks inundated.
You are all right. Look at it.
We stopped at the farm of 30-year-old father of 7, Umar in Okwakabi, outside the town of Loko in Nasarawa State. He's one of thousands of smallholder farmers who benefited from the Anchor Borers program and contributed to the rice pyramid as a member of the Rice Farmers Association. He has not only lost all the seeds planted, he has no idea how he will repay his 200,000 naira debt.
I borrowed money from the bank, and I don't know what to tell the bank. I don't even know what I and my family will eat now.
Jubrin is one of the leaders of the Farmers Cooperative Societies in Okwakabi. Is owing 500,000 naira. To repay their loans, every individual in Jubrin's 25-member cooperative society is expected to contribute 1,850 kilograms bags of rice paddy for the duration of the loan. They were all hoping to complete repayment during the next harvest season. Although they have been blamed for not heeding the flood warnings, the farmers argue the warnings came after planting. More so, 46-year-old Jubrin says this flooding is uncommon.
Even last year, they told us that the water is going to be too much, overflowing. And last year, we ride machine, look at the road, even the car passing this place. Even me, we are ride machine from here down to local, down to the during Hamata. So we didn't believe on that until this thing that happened to us this year. Even I told you that since I was born, only 2012 that I experienced it. If not, water never covered these villages.
Those that stay behind hope to make ends meet by fishing. And across the river from Loko in Nasarawa State to Agatu in Benue State, the story is not different. Smallholder farmers camping on riverbanks, praying that the water will recede. They are joined in this prayer by some other richer farmers. Organizing Secretary of Rice Farmers Association of Nigeria, Sam Yua, is one of those. He has 19.34 hectares of rice farm on the water in Makurdi.
The rice was coming up fine. Then suddenly this deluge came. It's not been easy. I saw the rice just submerging gradually until everything is underwater. The rice seeds I use actually are Faro 67. They are supposed to be flood-tolerant variety, but the tolerance is only for 2 weeks. And we are talking about 8 weeks now. Definitely what is underwater can no longer be alive.
Across town, the Benue State Commissioner for Rural Development, whose investment was funded by Bank of Industry, is threatening to sue the federal government for losses he has incurred.
I'm going to court. Let the court say, Victor, you don't have a case. We cannot allow things to happen the way they happen in this nation. For once, we need to sit up. And if there are ways that we can push our authorities in this country to sit up and do what they need to do, then we need to do that.
Back on the road and more than 5 hours drive from Benue to Nasarawa State, we arrived Tunga. Farmers here do not have what it takes to sue the federal government. They can only plead.
Padashine.
Really, government did not come to our rescue. Some of these banks will come and arrest our people here because we collected loan from them and there is no way of paying them back. So we were hoping government to come to our rescue so that the government will assist us in solving some of these problems. My real farm, our real farm here, a maize farm, about 4 to 5 hectares of maize farm that has been submerged by flood.
The people here have completely lost all they have. Unfortunately, farming in Nigeria is a tedious task, and for the last 2 years, these farmers have not been having it good. They've barely survived the impact of COVID-19 on sales of their produce. They battled with herders to save their crops, only to lose it to floods. The fact is, if they do not get the help they need, not only will they fall into extreme poverty, everyone who depend on their produce for supply face scarcity and price increases. And these simply means more people will face extreme hunger across the country. Victoria Okonkwo sits in a canoe as neighbors paddle her away from her house in Nigeria's food basket, Benue State, which is now underwater, along with more than 100,000 hectares of farmland. A teacher, Victoria, who is now squatting with her children at a friend's place, had gone to her house to see what she can salvage from her flooded home. She could only pick the head of a sewing machine.
It was last week that it started, so when I left, thinking that the water will not be this much, I came back the following week, only to see that everything is damaged. Right now, my television, my sewing machine, mattress, chairs, they are still inside there. I couldn't remove any of them.
Victoria is among at least 500,000 Nigerians impacted by flooding in 33 of Nigeria's 36 states this year. Farmers say the rising waters will push food bills higher in a country where millions have fallen into food poverty in the past 2 years. Rice farmer Abraham Horn has also lost 20 hectares of his rice farm to the flooding. His farm was along the banks of River Benue, locally called Fadama, a Hausa word for lowland farms. Farming was constrained due to flooding and food shortages and COVID restrictions in 2022. Prices shot higher due to the war in Ukraine and nationwide insecurity that has pushed thousands of farmers off their land.
Yeah, all this is my farm, right up to where we have the electric poles down south. Combined hectares, 50 hectares of land, all cultivated with rice that has gone down the drain because of the flood.
This flooding is happening at the same time that there has already been high prices of food from last year, further compounded again by the situation in Russia, Ukraine, and of course, a couple of months ago, India placed curbs on exports of rice. So, and of course, then also we have problem of access to foreign exchange. So everything, all of these wrong things are happening at the same time.
And those who already harvested their paddy rice are also not left out of the flooding issue. Rice mills are submerged in water as millers frantically try to sell off the little they were able to salvage. Farmer and mother of 4, Tesu D, said 2 hectares of her rice and nearly all her soybeans in Benue were underwater. What she had harvested, she has to sell now before it has dried because her house has been washed away.
My house is so close to the riverbank, so when flood came, the mud houses collapsed. This is not when I intended to sell my rice, but because my rooms have collapsed, I do not have any option but to sell my rice paddy because there's nowhere to keep it.
But this lawyer and flood victim will also have to contend with high food prices as he has just returned from a tiring trip to his flooded home. While he is among the few that were able to salvage some of their properties, this storage house has been his home for 2 weeks, while his wife and children camp with a relative. He's unsure when his family will be together again.
These are my properties, my household items packed in one corner. The other properties you see around belongs to other families.
Commodities Exchange, AFEX Nigeria, estimates flooding and other factors will cut maize output by more than 12% year-on-year and rice by more than 21%. And this is a serious problem in Nigeria, where inflation hit a 17-year high in August and led food inflation at 23.12%. As climate change continues to go unchecked, weather extremes and disaster losses are expected to increase in the future.
We have to invest in these rural areas to make them livable. Livable for human beings and livable for businesses. Again, I don't understand why it is out of reach for a given African country to get a minimum decent infrastructure in the rural areas, a marketplace, a hall for training, street lighting, solar, all right, water infrastructure using deep well, whatever. It doesn't cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars to get a deep well for a village. All right, so it is not something you cannot do. All right, you cannot do all the villages, but start somewhere. Do 10 this time, 20 next year, 30 next year. But we have to get to a place where the rural space is livable for the people who are there and for the businesses. And that requires a minimum infrastructure. That's also how you reduce the risks. They're better informed, they can plan better, and they're interconnected with the rest of the economy. So when risk comes, it is spread. Okay? And it reduces also you as a government, the investment you have to do to face risk, because the impact of risk is less due to what you've created. So these are all things that don't cost money, but they require attention. And they require being steady and staying the course and just spending 5 years and then dealing with them. You'll be in a different place.
The impact of losses and damage associated with climate change can set back development by potentially increasing not only the incidence, but also the severity of poverty.
Usually in countries where things like this happen, government help by way of subsidies, paying part of the premium. So when government pays part of the premium and people now see those policies working, then they can now begin to pay from their own pocket. But right now, because people are not aware of insurance, as a first step, some form of subsidies have to be in place. And it has to be compulsory. It has to be compulsory, and people have to see the impact for it to go places.
Experts say poverty and vulnerability are deeply intertwined. The poor have low adaptive capacity because they have fewer resources to cope with climate change risks. This resource base is further diminished with every extreme weather event, thus deepening their poverty.
What do we have in terms of mechanisms to protect livelihoods in the context of a changing climate and all the different shocks, right? So agriculture is just one part of people's livelihoods. Isn't it infuriating and perhaps amazing that any little tiny shock in Africa causes so much hurt, so much harm, so much damage to the communities? Because we don't look at what's happening in terms of chronic vulnerability. It's only when a shock comes that it's, oh boy, these guys, but they've been dying before. But we didn't pay attention to that. So what every government ought to do and need is to understand the nature and patterns of vulnerability across their communities. We have started work on that at Academia 2063 during COVID. You need to know, here are my communities that are the most vulnerable. Looking at level of poverty, malnutrition, prevalence of diseases, access to services, and. You can cartograph. And you know, okay, these are the guys that have the least to absorb a shock. You keep your eyes on them if something happens. That will bring perhaps this insurance, but also social safety nets, cash transfers, subsidies, you name it, but also make sure they get the services there even before a shock happens, right? So it is a level of preparedness. Again, it doesn't cost money to do that. You take Ibadan in another university, you give them a couple of years, they can get you that cartography of vulnerability across Nigeria. Then you know as a government. Here's where I have to keep my mind. If you go to the countries of the north, in the winter, they already know where to take the truck to plow the snow before the snow comes. They know the bad spots, right? As a government, to deal with these risks and vulnerabilities, you need to know the bad spots in your country. And then you start putting in the mechanism to protect them.
Climate risk insurance helps individuals break out of this vicious cycle of poverty and vulnerability, increasing people's ability to manage as well as to mitigate climate risk by spreading it among people and across time can significantly reduce their vulnerability and contribute to their long-term social and economic well-being, especially as part of a menu of options to incentivize risk-aware behavior. Flooding is one of the most devastating hazards that are likely to increase in many regions of the world, partly due to global climate change and poor governance. To stop the menace, everyone sure needs to do their part. That's our show for the week. Thank you for watching. Our inbox @channelstv.com is available anytime, any day. From all of us here in Lagos, it's bye for now.